So all in all, we have about 15 submarines currently in service with us, which is about 1/3 what we should have. Incredible. We have, remember that India is because of our history of land wars and our kind of the fact that all of our conflicts have been basically, northward facing with China or Pakistan. It's easy to forget that India has a 7,600 kilometer coastline and an enormous maritime domain to govern, which is called the Indian Ocean region. And for the longest time, India has been, and I will say this straight, we've been sea blind. It's the reason, and I've said this before in another episode, that it's actually kind of mystifying to most India watchers that the Indian Navy is the smallest of our services when it should, at the very least, be as big as the army.
Where the hell are these submarines? Because in my research, I found out that this project was approved by the Cabinet Committee on Security in 2015. We are in 2024. There is not any news item about where these submarines are, whether they're even being built right now.
If things are not going well, let's not hear about it. If things are going well, you definitely don't want to hear about it, because you don't want anyone to keep track of it, because there are enough countries that are interested in this particular program. What I can tell you for sure is that work has begun.
Hello and welcome to the 22nd episode of In Our Defense. Shiv, I have a question for you. Is there any food in the world that you don't consider mediocre?
People have been asking me to start talking about the foods that I like, and they say that it'll be a shorter list. And I'm like, where's the fun in that? Everyone's talking about the food they like. There's a bigger world in the food that I don't like. So this is not going to end anytime soon.
So for some context for our listeners and viewers, Shiv runs this, not thread per se, but every week or so, I think he puts out a tweet where he just describes one of the world's most mediocre foods. And the most recent one, the reason I brought it up, the most recent one was khandvi, which is, I'm a Gujarati, so
it's close to your heart. So you've taken it personally, huh?
Though I'll be very honest, I don't like khandvi that much, but it's I think a decent enough food. I don't think it qualifies as to be called mediocre, but
this is the emotional side of you defending your cuisine.
Yeah, right. Let's talk about the world of defense.
From khandvi to defense.
Yes, from khandvi to defense. Yeah, let's do that. What we'll talk about this week, we'll talk about something to do with the Navy. The Navy has got a new chief this week. I forgot his name.
Admiral D.K. Tripathi.
D.K. Tripathi, yes. You met him actually yesterday. We're recording this on Thursday actually for a change. Normally we record on Wednesdays and put the episode out on Thursdays. So as an aside for our listeners who follow us, if we are late by a day, do pardon us for that. So we are going to talk about the Navy and specifically the Navy's nuclear submarine program. But before we do that, a short tangent, kind of to do with submarines actually, about a missile launch that happened yesterday or the day before, if I'm not wrong. We did an episode on missiles in a previous episode, and the DRDO launched what is known as the SMART system, which is supersonic missile assisted torpedo.
Release of torpedo.
Sounds very fancy, but the way I get it, it's basically a supersonic missile that carries a torpedo to a particular location out in the ocean and then drops it from there, and then that torpedo submerges and then I'm guessing hits a submarine. Sounds pretty cool. Tell us more about this.
It's an incredible test. This weapon was actually tested for the first time a couple of years ago in 2022. And this is, as far as the public is concerned, the second test. We don't know if there have been other tests in between. But this is an extremely unique weapon because, when it comes to a torpedo, the way people usually understand a torpedo is it's a weapon that's either fired, from a ship or a submarine or an aircraft. And it's basically... swims towards its target and explodes. So the target can be either a ship or a submarine. Typically torpedoes have not very long range because they're traveling inside water where it's difficult to maintain, targeting information, etc. And therefore, typically torpedoes tend to be pretty short range munitions. Now, what the SMART basically does is gives you an anti-submarine or an anti-ship kind of torpedo capability that can be launched from land, which means that you're taking a torpedo, which typically has a range of about 20 kilometers in this case, fitting it into a canister carried by a missile, a supersonic missile, that is going to blast it to a distance of about 650 kilometers from land. So if you're sitting on land on a coastal missile battery and you've got target information about, and I'm speaking about a kind of, ideal scenario where everything works out, weather is good, you've got the target information, everything. You're basically sitting on the coast with the missile switch in your hand. You launch that missile. It blasts off, flies 650 kilometers, up to 650 kilometers out to sea. At the end of that flight, it drops the torpedo into the water. The torpedo then activates and then completes another 20 kilometers or so until it hits the target. So you've got a system where you have an incredibly standoff range anti-submarine / anti-ship torpedo weapon that negates many of the perceived disadvantages of engaging with a submarine or a ship from near quarters, which is usually the case when you're using a torpedo in the conventional way that it is used. What this gives you is long range ability. It gives you that standoff ability, the ability to pose a threat to enemy submarines and ships without having a ship or a submarine at sea. So it's very much a weapon that will give submarines and ships a sense of pause, because it's an additional threat. Apart from having to deal with, anti-submarine ships and other submarines in the region, if you're a submarine commander, you'll have to think about, oh my God, what these guys have on land also. That also threatens me, and at a huge distance. 650 kilometers is not a joke. It's a massive distance. So that's what this weapon was. And as far as I can tell, and as far as the DRDO have been sharing with us, it was a totally successful mission. The test also apparently took place at its maximum range, which is incredible. So very exciting weapon.
All right. So let's move on to the topic of submarines, and especially India's nuclear submarine program, which actually branches off into two different types of submarines. But we'll come to that a bit later. I first want to just shortly focus on just submarines itself to kind of give us a base on which we'll have this episode. So I was doing some research, and I see that India's submarine fleet is very, very small.
Yeah.
We have around 16 to 18 submarines, including 2 nuclear ballistic submarines. The US, Russia, and China all have more than 60 each. US has 68, China has around that same number, Russia has 60. UK also has a very small number, around 10 to 12, but they have the ability to have a nuclear submarine out in the ocean, and they've been at all times, and they have a record for having that for the last 50 to 55 years, if I'm not wrong. But anyway, we'll come to that later when we talk about nuclear ballistic submarines. First, why is India's submarine fleet so small? Because we have one of the largest coastlines in the world. I think our coastline is bigger and longer than our land borders combined with Pakistan and China. I could be wrong, but you kind of get my point. So for a country that has such a huge coastline that it has to defend, why is our submarine fleet so small?
Well, Dave, the simple answer to that question is that it's been a cascading effect of missteps, lack of planning, the huge constraints of India's defense procurement procedure, ham-handed foresight in terms of what requirements will be in the next few decades. All of these, like so many of the things we've discussed in the past as well, have sort of compounded into a kind of problem that can't be resolved in a hurry. And we're talking about submarines, which are, which unlike land vehicles or aircraft, take years and years and years to build and to plan. And so India has had if you look at India's submarine program since the 70s and 80s, it's been one unfortunate crisis after the other. Very quick backstory for our viewers who may not have a background as far as our submarine program is concerned. The Indian Navy initially operated Soviet Foxtrot class submarines. A number of them. We never built any, of course. And these served India during the 70s, right? The first submarines that India purchased of a kind of newer generation starting in the 80s and 90s were the Kilo class. Now, the Kilo class is a Russian, and we're not even talking about nuclear submarines yet, Dave, to clarify. We're talking only about conventional submarines here, which is to say diesel electric submarines. The Kilo class submarines which came into India, we had about a dozen of those. Now I think we've got about 7 of those because some of them are very old. Some of them have been retired. The Sindhu Rakshak blew up in that famous accident. One of them has been gifted to Myanmar. One of them is in refit in Russia. So we have roughly about 7 of those left. Then there are 4 German HTW Type 209 submarines, 4 of which are currently in service. And the newest generation of submarines that we have are the Calvary, or the Scorpion, the French Scorpion class submarines, 6 of which have been built, 5 of which are already in service, and 1 is going to be joining service, I think, this year or next year. So all in all, we have about 15 submarines currently in service with us, which is about 1/3 what we should have. Incredible. We have, remember that India is because of our history of land wars and our kind of the fact that all of our conflicts have been basically, northward facing with China or Pakistan. It's easy to forget that India has a 7,600 kilometer coastline and an enormous maritime domain to govern, which is called the Indian Ocean region. And for the longest time, India has been, and I will say this straight, we've been sea blind. It's the reason, and I've said this before in another episode, that it's actually kind of mystifying to most India watchers that the Indian Navy is the smallest of our services when it should, at the very least, be as big as the Army, given how much sea we operate in. Now, 15 submarines, conventional submarines, diesel electric submarines, with none of the kind of capabilities a country like India needs for a submarine force, are in our service right now, which is why there's always been that famous saying about India's submarine arm. It's that sinking feeling, but not in the way that they like, And the thing about the submarine arm is the HDW submarine program hit a quote-unquote scam. India was supposed to build more of those submarines. That got stopped in its tracks because of a scam. And we all know how scams work in India. The only people who gain from scams, are the middlemen and the commission agents. The armed forces always lose. The companies never really, pay any, punitive damages to the country, and nothing ever happens. So after India had invested billions of dollars into building a submarine production line in Mazagon in Mumbai, and you're from Mumbai, you know that, it had to be kind of just wrapped up after building just 4 measly building 2 measly submarines. Cut forward another, 15 years. 15 years later, the Scorpion program came online. By which time force levels of the Indian Navy were terribly, terribly small. Now, remember that all through this time, the Indian Navy has managed to lease one nuclear-powered attack submarine from Russia, the Chakra 1. Then we had the Chakra 2. In 2019, we've signed a lease for Chakra 3, which will come maybe next year or the year after next. These are all little piecemeal. We're going to talk about our program a little while, but this is just symptomatic of how ad hoc, temporary, unplanned, scattered India's submarine acquisition program is concerned. Now, Sandeep Unithan, who used to be with India Today magazine and who I consider he's the alpha and the omega to me as far as submarine warfare is concerned. Nobody knows more about him or has written more about submarine warfare in India than he has. And he actually talks about how the decade that we're in right now is called the lost decade for submarines. The reason for that is really scary, Dev. By the end of this decade, India should ideally have had 27 submarines.
Wow.
27 conventional attack submarines by the end of this decade. And what will we have by the end of this decade? I think 16 submarines, which is 11 less than what you should actually be having. And the numbers are actually worse because some of the submarines we have right now, by the end of this decade, will be retired. Yep. So you have a really, really troubling scenario as far as our conventional submarine fleet is concerned. Now, the follow-on attempt by India to build more submarines, because in the 80s and 90s, it was decided that we will have 2 big submarine production lines in the country. Now, you've got another program that is stuck for the last 10, 12 years called Project 75I, India, where despite having a Scorpion class production line in Mazagon in Mumbai, you're still in the global market intending to hold this competitive tender between different competitors to build another production line. Now, one would imagine that it makes sense that if you already have a production line of a submarine into which you've sunk billions of dollars of taxpayers' money into, Build more of those submarines, improve upon them, add more, Indian systems to them, force the French to modify it even more to your demands, and, use that for your economy rather than waste even more money to build another production line. But then it becomes the whole, oh, it's a single tender. Why should it only be this company? Let's give other companies a chance, which is theoretically, that's a fair point as far as India's, defense procurement procedure is concerned. But the fact remains that the only one who's lost in the end is the Navy. It's the reason why the Navy is saddled with 15 subpar submarines. And I'm not saying these submarines are useless. They all do a good job. But these are, apart from the Scorpions, which have entered service in the last few years, the Kilos and the HTW submarines are all 80s, 70s vintage submarines that have no business being in service as your frontline submarines anymore. They can be in your fleet, but they can't be the shining jewels of your submarine force. So it's an absolutely shameful situation.
Right. And I think it gets even worse when you come to the subject of this episode, which is the nuclear submarine program. Because right now, officially, I think we have only two. There have been some rumors for the last couple of years, especially on social media, that the third nuclear ballistic submarine is on its way. It has been launched. It's there in the dockyard over there. Some satellite imagery to say, okay, that's how it's lying anyway. So we have the INS Arihant officially commissioned, I think, somewhere in the late 2000s or early this last decade. And the INS Arighat, never officially commissioned actually, secretly launched. Again, it took Austin experts on social media to kind of see, oh my God, it's already out there in the... But the popular media reporting says right now it's almost at the end of its sea trials and it'll be in proper service soon. The third one, like I said, it's kind of on its way. Before we get into the program itself, first a nerdy question, the technical difference between what is known as SSBN, which is submersible ship ballistic nuclear, and SSN, which is submersible ship nuclear.
Yeah.
This is going to be the most exciting part of this episode, SSN actually. We'll come to that because that's also part of the Project 75, but that's the alpha of Project 75. We'll come to that, very interesting. But before we do that, the technical difference between these two. Yeah. And one more question. What makes an SSBN so stealthy? So, and dumb it down for us. So, for example, with stealth airplanes, they have sort of a material and sort of a build that kind of not blocks radar but evades radar by being very flat, not having too many curves, not having too many sharp edges to not be seen on radar. But what makes a nuclear submarine so stealthy under the water?
Okay, so first let me quickly just tell our listeners and viewers the difference between the submarines we have in service right now, which are called conventional submarines, and nuclear submarines, and then I'll get to the differences between what you were talking about, SSBNs and SSNs. Now, the submarines that India has in service right now, and these are submarines that when you think of a submarine, mostly you think of the submarines like these, like the Kilo class and the HTW that we're talking about. These are diesel electric submarines, which basically means that these are submarines where the propeller is basically driven by diesel engines and air-breathing batteries. Now, the constraint in these submarines is endurance. The reason is that submarines are their stealthiest when they are underwater. The minute they come to the surface, they become instantly visible to anyone who's watching, whether it is a satellite, whether it is a radar, whether it's an aircraft. They become instantly visible because there is nothing sticks out more like a sore thumb than a periscope, amidst the waves. So the last thing a submarine wants to do is to surface when it's on operational patrol. Sadly, diesel electric submarines need to surface every now and then to suck in oxygen from the air in order to recharge their batteries and get their diesel engines to run. And that's when they can submerge again and use. So it's almost like coming up for a breath. It's like a swimmer with a very long endurance, 6-7 hours of endurance, but they still have to come up and breathe and then go back down. So that's a huge drawback of conventional attack submarines. There is a technology which we'll come into later called air-independent propulsion, which is basically a kind of propulsion plug that goes into new generation diesel electric submarines that actually partially offsets the need to come up for air, which means that the supply of air happens while the submarine is actually underwater. There is a chemical process through which this oxygen is supplied to the engines without having to take it from the atmosphere. So it's called air-independent propulsion. Those are there in some new generation submarines. We don't have that yet. Now, it kind of gives it a kind of quasi-nuclear ability, which is basically to say that it's underwater. It doesn't need to come up for air as often as if it did not have this plug. Now let me come to nuclear submarines. Remember the word endurance very, very carefully, because that is the touchstone of what differentiates a diesel-electric submarine from a nuclear submarine. In a nuclear submarine, Dev, the propulsion system is driven by a nuclear reactor, not by a diesel engine, not by batteries, but literally a nuclear reactor, a miniaturized nuclear reactor on board the submarine is supplying all power for the turbine, for the propeller, for the electricity, everything. It's powered by a nuclear system. As everyone knows, nuclear energy is hugely efficient for the purposes that we're talking about. And crucially, it basically completely negates the requirement of having to surface for oxygen. This propulsion system does not require oxygen from the atmosphere, which means that a submarine that's powered by a nuclear reactor, a nuclear submarine, can theoretically stay underwater indefinitely. Which means that if the nuclear core of its engine is able to propel that submarine for 3 years, which it actually can without being replenished, then that submarine crew can actually be underwater for 3 years. They don't have to come up for air. So the only limiting factor for that submarine is food and human endurance. So to be very clear, just to summarize that difference, in a diesel-electric submarine, the limiting factor is the requirement of oxygen. In a nuclear submarine, the limiting factor is human endurance and the requirement of food and supplies and stuff for which you have to surface, right? Now that we've got that difference clear, now let's talk about the difference between SSBNs and SSNs. Now that sounds like word soup to many. So let me just clarify what that means. An SSBN is basically a nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine. And an SSN is a nuclear-powered attack submarine. Can be a little confusing to those who are not familiar, but I'll give you a kind of metaphor that makes it easy to differentiate between the two. Think of an SSBN, which is a nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, as a bomber. It's a bomber. And a nuclear-powered attack submarine is like a fighter aircraft. Okay? A bomber is not really a combat aircraft. It doesn't go into the fight. A bomber is there as a kind of last resort, weapon system where the destruction is total. Okay? And we've said this very importantly in a previous episode as well. A nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, Dev, is not a weapon of war. It is a weapon of nuclear deterrence. It is not a conventional weapon. It is not counted among your arsenal for a conventional conflict or a battle. Because like we've said in our nuclear episode, which did very well, if your nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines are activated, it means the end of the world is possibly near. It means that the balloon has gone up to such a drastic extent that nuclear war is at your doorstep. That's what it means. So the whole point of having nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines is that you don't ever have to use them. My favorite conflict paradox is that the whole purpose of nuclear weapons is lost if you have to use them, right? Now, huge difference between what I've just described as a nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine and a nuclear-powered attack submarine. Now, nuclear-powered attack submarines are basically your daily use sharks at sea. Very similar to your diesel-electric submarines, same kinds of missions, but they've got much longer endurance. And these are your actual teeth. These are the submarines you actually need right now. The Indian Navy needs these submarines. They don't carry nuclear weapons. Let's very, very clearly differentiate between the two. A nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines is carrying nuclear-tipped missiles. But a nuclear-powered attack submarine is carrying conventional weapons because it is your daily bread submarine, which is out at sea in large numbers, capable of denying maritime domain to your enemies, It carries torpedoes. It carries land attack cruise missiles. It carries sea skimming anti-ship missiles. It carries anti-submarine weapons. Extremely stealthy, moves really fast, that kind of thing. So they're very different. They're your fighter aircraft, which you can use every day to establish your presence and scare the enemy. Your ballistic missile submarines are this huge, big fat fellow lumbering secretly somewhere. They don't need speed. They actually don't even need very much stealth, because the reason for that is they are slow moving, packed with nuclear weapons, and they're not trying to evade anyone. If they get to a place, a hiding place somewhere, they don't move very much. When a ballistic missile submarine is on patrol, it may travel a far distance, but at a time when it needs to be used, it doesn't actually need to travel very far. It needs to stay submerged in one place from which it can launch its missiles. So there's actually there's no great requirement for a nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine to have a great amount of speed or agility and things like that. They do, but I'm saying there's no requirement. It's like a big lumbering truck containing missiles. So that's the purpose of it. But your nuclear-powered attack submarines have to be like sharks, very agile, very fast, 30 knots, the ability to evade, be completely silent at certain speeds, the ability to completely evade ship sonars, the ability to move from one place to another really, really fast, the ability to submerge quickly at very, very short notice without any preparations, and have a nuclear-powered reactor, which means that they can stay underwater indefinitely. So they are, Rear Admiral Raja Menon, famous naval writer, had described nuclear-powered attack submarines as the ultimate arbiter of naval power, the ultimate arbiter of sea power, because if you have these, it basically means you don't need many other things. There's one controversial view that if you have enough nuclear-powered attack submarines, you don't need aircraft carriers, you don't need other kinds of things. You have enough of these, your sea is safe. So that's what the differences are.
Right. Let's stay on nuclear-powered ballistic missiles, submarines for a bit before we move on to the curious case of the SSN program of India's. So we have two right now. A few years ago, I think the INS Arihant tested actually a ballistic missile from the sea, and back then there was wide jubilation that India's nuclear triad is complete. Now I won't say that was misreporting, but I think saying nuclear triad is complete is sort of a misnomer, because it is complete only when the Arihant is out on patrol. And the Arihant, if you remember, we also had a famous accident because of which it was for many months in a dock getting repaired. So to take the idea, that's why I mentioned UK at the beginning of this episode. Even though it has only around 10 to 12 submarines, I think it has 4 nuclear powered ballistic submarines. Because of which, what the Royal Navy claims is that there has been one nuclear powered ballistic submarine out in the sea at all times in the last 57 years.
Yeah.
What they do is essentially when one has to come back, they send one out. So where do you see India's idea and dreams of actually getting the true nuclear triad? Are we also aiming for 4 submarines? Where is that project, and where is the project at right now, basically?
Yeah. So the INS. I was among a small group of very lucky journalists who was taken. All our phones, cameras, everything were taken away from us in July 2009. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, and we were taken to the shipbuilding center in Visakhapatnam, where it was for the first time that anyone outside the advanced technology project was laying eyes on the Arihant. Just a few months before that, Sandeep Unithan had broken the news that it was called the Arihant, and we were all there. No pictures, no photographs. There are only two photos actually exist of that occasion. One of them is of Gursharan Kaur breaking a coconut on the submarine. And I remember many of us, including me, we were making sketches of the submarine because nobody could take pictures. There were no cameras. We were doing our TV stand-ups outside where nobody could see anything. So very secretive, but actually an incredible sort of muscle flex by the UPA government at that time. Very unusual for a government to take a call to publicize the launch of a nuclear submarine. But they were obviously sending out a strategic message to the world, especially to China, that, India has arrived in that sense. But the thing to remember about the Arihant, Dev, is that it is an operational submarine. There is no doubt about it. It's on patrol, etc. But the Arihant was, in every respect, is basically intended to be a technology demonstrator. Remember, it is citizen zero as far as our nuclear submarine program is concerned. This is where all the learnings, mistakes, successes have manifested themselves. So there are many things that are right with this submarine. There are many things that are the result of, making errors and learning from them. Russia was involved in a big way, remember. So in many ways, including, not just including, but especially its size, it's quite a small ballistic missile submarine. Usually ballistic missile submarines are much larger. This is I think, if I'm not mistaken, about 6,000 tons, which makes it a kind of mini boomer, as they call boomers, ballistic missile submarine. Having said that, India doesn't have the luxury of, having a technology demonstrator and not being of operational utility. So let's make no mistake, the Arihant is out at sea. It's operational. It's administered by the Strategic Forces Command, which we've talked about in a previous episode. So there's no doubt about it. The submarines that come after the Arihant is where this third leg of the nuclear triad will actually sort of come into its own. And it's happening progressively. It's not something that happens overnight. But the Arihant, the long journey to the Arihant was necessary. Because this was technology that nobody was going to give you. Even the Russians didn't really give you, the last mile of technologies was still had to be developed here in India. I'm not negating what the Russians did. They did a huge amount for Arihant, but ultimately there were things that even they wouldn't share with India. The submarine that you mentioned, Arighat, which has been a bit of a mystery boat for the last many years. Has it been commissioned? Has it not been commissioned? Is it still on sea trials? Now this is a very interesting boat, and it's designated as S3. Yes. I love how the submarine program has all these mysterious names. S2 was the Arihant. Now you've got the S3, which is the Arighat, which has been on sea trials for quite a few years now. And this particular submarine, whether or not it has been commissioned, A, we don't know, and B, it doesn't really matter. And the reason for that is because it's a nuclear command asset, which means that, if push comes to shove, it's going to be used anyway. So that doesn't bother us for the purposes of this podcast. But the Arighat is an important nuclear submarine because it is basically the Arihant with all the edges smoothed out, many learnings and issues kind of corrected, many things preempted that were seen in the Arihant, etc. So it's a technologically, weapons-wise, and in every other respect, a far superior nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine. Now, remember that the nuclear submarine program in India has a huge amount of involvement from Indian industry. Yes. Larsen and Toubro and other companies like that are deeply involved with this program, including the fabrication of the hull, which takes place in Hazira in Gujarat. So S3 is your Arighat. Following the S3, you've got two improved. So the Arihant and the Arighat are the Arihant class submarines, two of them. Then you've got something called the S4 and the S4 star. I know it's a little confusing, but bear with me. The S4 and the S4 star are two submarines which don't have a name yet, but for the purposes of understanding, it's like an improved Arihant class. Okay. They will be the same size as the Arihant, more or less the same size, because if you've got a proven hull, why would you tinker with it? You've got a proven hull. So S4 and S4 star will basically be two improved Arihant class submarines, where the improvements will be in the reactor, in the propulsion system, the interiors, and the weapons, weapon carrying capacity. So they will be far, far improved technologically speaking to the Arihant. Then you've got this very interesting and mysterious submarine called the S5. Now, your Arihant and your improved Arihant. So we've got S2 Arihant, you've got S3, which is Arighat, you've got S4 and S4 star, which are the improved Arihant class. Then you've got an S5, which unlike the above four, which are about 6,000 ton submarines, this one is a big, fat submarine, 14,000 ton submarine, more than double the size, which means that this becomes your first true to life, right-sized ballistic missile submarine of the kind comparable with, with the United States and the Russian ballistic missile submarines. Here you've got the size that speaks of the kind of nuclear deterrent mission that you're aiming at. So I'm not going to say that we have to wait till S5 until we have the nuclear triad. Because if you look at it theoretically, Dev, the Arihant currently comes armed with the K-15 missile, which is again a technology demonstrator. It's a ballistic missile system with a very modest range of about 750 to 800 kilometers. The K-4 has also been tested from the Arihant, which has a range of about, 3,000 kilometers. And then there's the K5, which is going to be tested later on, and we'll have to see how that actually goes. So theoretically speaking, and for the purposes of this discussion, the nuclear triad is not complete, but the third leg exists, which means that India has a seaborne, a submarine-launched nuclear missile capability. We have that capability right now, but to realize its full potential, you still need to have a large-sized ballistic missile submarine, nuclear-powered, with your K4, K5 missiles fully operationally ready, not under development, not under testing, not under, let's see where this goes. Like 6 or 10 of them loaded into that submarine at all times, ready for doomsday. So that is when your nuclear triad will be complete. But do we have the capability right now? Yes, we do.
Right. Interesting. We'll move on to the SSNs or the nuclear power attack submarines and the curious case of them not existing in India's inventory right now. But after a quick break.
We are looking at Ivy League colleges where students are not kids. They know exactly what they are doing. They have read. And I'm talking to people who are in the encampment, who've pitched tents in the lawns of Columbia University or Harvard or Dartmouth, Emerson. They're all doing that because they think that what the United States of America is doing in supporting Israel is wrong. There are many Jewish students. There are voices of Jewish people who are supporting the cause and are part of the protests.
I mean, we saw protests happening in Israel itself against the Netanyahu government.
And very conservative Jews from Jerusalem were protesting. So it is not anti-Jew. It is not anti-Semitic. It's been a monologue. Finally. When we talk about America teaches the world democracy, values of democracy.
Of course.
Holds a torch to all those who clamp down or crack down on students. India also was on the receiving end of America. When we had our own protests, right or wrong, how it was handled is not the point of discussion today. But the fact that it has happened in America and was allowed to happen in America, America should be rethinking how they want to be seen across the world.
Quite an explanation, Geeta. I mean, it would be difficult for me to clip the important parts because genuinely, to all those people who are listening and watching us,
you should give me credit for remembering all your questions because your intro was a monologue of questions. I remembered each point and responded to all of them. So you should give me credit for that.
That's what black coffee does to you. Retention.
Welcome back. Shiv and I are discussing India's nuclear submarine projects. We just discussed one, the ballistic missile submarine portion of which is basically a submarine, nuclear-powered submarine that is able to fire ballistic missiles that can cause doomsday, essentially, end of kingdom come, etc. I want to talk about the SSNs, the other nuclear-powered submarines that you explained the difference between the two before the break, which are, like you said, your prime, your teeth. These are the ones that you need to have right now. One, explain this paradox to me, because for me, as a layperson, an SSBN or something like an Arihant seems like a massive technological investment. It's called the advanced technology vehicle as well. So how is it that you have a nuclear-powered ballistic submarine, but you don't have a nuclear-powered attack submarine?
Yeah.
So first, right off the bat, let's talk about that. And second, where the hell are these submarines? Because in my research, I found out that this project was approved by the Cabinet Committee on Security in 2015. We are in 2024.
Yeah.
There is not any news item about where these submarines are, whether they're even being built right now. Is there some blueprint? Is there some ideas, etc., etc.? So what is this project and where is it?
So you've hit the nail on the head with that question, Dev, which is that, and this has been a running joke for, observers of India's submarine program, which is that this is probably the only first country that has built a far more complicated nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine and still hasn't built a nuclear-powered attack submarine. So it's actually gone about this in the reverse, because not to say that nuclear powered attack submarines are simple, they're not, they're extremely complex, but one would have imagined that a country with India's pressing naval warfare needs would have invested more time and a sort of accelerated pace towards SSNs, as they're called. Nuclear powered attack submarines are your sharks. They are your fighter aircraft. They are your roti kapda makan as far as naval warfare is concerned, or they should be. And the shame is that we don't have them in any large measure. We've had them in a very ad hoc manner, and that too by lease from Russia. In the 80s, we had a Charlie class submarine, I think the Chakra 1. Then we had the Chakra 2, which was an Akula 2 class submarine, which faced an accident. Now we're going to get a third one, in the next few years. We'd signed a deal for that in 2017, 2018. The year may be wrong, but basically that. Now, having one leased nuclear-powered attack submarine, which is not even yours, it's not your tech, it's constantly monitored by the Russians, is a very suboptimal way of arming yourself with that capability. And I don't think anyone thought that it was a permanent solution. So it has always, the need for India having its own credible fleet of indigenously built nuclear-powered attack submarines has been felt for a very long time. But I think the fact that the Arihant program had sucked up so many resources and energy, because a decision had been taken by the political powers that be that a ballistic missile submarine is our priority. As a nuclear power, we need to have that. We can sit here and discuss till kingdom come whether it was a good decision or a bad decision. But the ironic truth also is that having figured out the difficult end of nuclear submarines, there is the suggestion that now executing a nuclear-powered attack submarine might be a little bit easier. I'm not saying it will be. Hundreds of things can still go wrong, but it might be a little simpler because it's like your maths paper ho gaya, ab bas English reh gaya. It's like that, It's like you finished the tough thing and now this will be a little simpler. The truth of the matter is, many lessons that India should have learned about placing priority on its submarine arm have got lost in the politics of should we go for another aircraft carrier? Should we have a third aircraft carrier? No, let's not do that. Let's have submarines. So then you change your mind later. No, because we've spent so much money building this aircraft carrier. How can we build only one? We should build a second one. So all these cross-purposing lobbies and views and doctrines are clashing inside the Navy and the and the national security establishment. Has taken its toll on decision-making clarity as far as something as basic as nuclear-powered attack submarines are concerned. The problem is Indian decision makers over decades have looked at nuclear-powered attack submarines as a luxury. As like, oh, nuclear powered attack submarines, these are luxury items. These are not your everyday items. The truth is they're not. The truth is they're not. China has them. The United States has an entirely nuclear powered submarine force. Entirely. They don't have conventional submarines. They only have nuclear powered attack submarines and ballistic missile submarines. So when we do that bean count, which you did at the top of the show, when you said the US has this many, China has this many, we have this many, look at the number of nuclear-powered attack submarines that these countries have. And we don't even have one. Not even the one that we had on lease is gone. Okay, so we are stuck with 15, struggling diesel-electric submarines. Not all of them are struggling. Some of them are new generation like the Scorpions. But the point I'm trying to make is if you don't have high endurance nuclear powered attack submarines, you are dead in the water. I mean, literally. It's a bad situation to be in for a country like India at a time when China is aggressively probing the Indian Ocean. And no other instrument of conflict, no other instrument of naval warfare provides you the kind of sea denial, ocean denial capability that a submarine does. An aircraft carrier doesn't do that. An aircraft carrier is about force projection. It's about you go to somebody else's waters and you project power to them. A submarine is sitting and hiding in your waters, signaling to the enemy that don't you dare think of coming anywhere close. It's defensive. And if necessary, can be offensive if you need to use it that way. But you've got to think about the signaling of these two things. So is India a power projecting force, or is it about making sure that nobody can come into its domain? It can be both things, but there has to be a sense of priority because we don't have infinite budgets. Now, to answer your question about where the hell is this program? Now, it doesn't have a name yet. They're lovingly called India's Sharks, but there is in 2019, it was reported here on India Today that the Cabinet Committee on Security had basically signed off finally on a 96,000 crore rupee deal to build 6 Indian-made nuclear-powered attack submarines. Now, just to show you an India map of where all things are happening as far as this program are concerned. In Delhi is where the program is administered from. The Advanced Technology Vessel program for the Arihant, etc. That's where the headquarters is. Gurugram has the design bureau for this submarine. Hazira in Gujarat is where the hull is built and fabricated by Larsen & Toubro. Mumbai is where the Bhabha Atomic Research Center is. That's where the reactor design takes place and where the Indian nuclear powered attack submarines will have improved nuclear reactor. Kalpakkam is where the reactor will actually be built in Tamil Nadu. And Visakhapatnam is where the entire final integration and trials will take place. So basically you're talking about Delhi, Haryana, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. This is your geographical stretch of where these submarines will be built. Now, clearance has been accorded to this submarine class. I wouldn't feel too bad about not reading any news articles about progress because that's the way they like it. You know, once a submarine program begins, not hearing about it is actually good news because these are nuclear submarine programs. If things are not going well, let's not hear about it. If things are going well, you definitely don't want to hear about it because you don't want anyone to keep track of it because there are enough countries that are interested in this particular program. What I can tell you for sure is that work has begun. The engineering teams, the design teams, etc., have been moving at full speed since project sanction a few years ago, and things are moving.
Right. Very good point in the middle of your answer where you talked about the clashing interests between whether you should have submarines or whether you should have another aircraft carrier, because that was something actually I wanted to talk about on this episode anyway. If you look at the numbers, so you have a plan of 4 SSBNs, or 2 are kind of in service. You spoke about one more, the S5, which would be something even bigger than this. You have a plan of 6 SSNs, like you said right now. And you have 2 aircraft carriers right now, one bought and one made on your own, and the Navy has said that they will most likely be placing an order for one more INS Vikrant, one more Indian made aircraft carrier. The Navy, I imagine, is a very expensive business to operate, because I mean all of these sound like big investments. These are like, I'm guessing any naval equipment is going to be damn expensive, unlike let's say the Army. Air Force also to an expensive, but only when it comes to your fighter jets, right? But with Navy, I think almost anything that the Navy would want would be damn expensive. So let's not talk about the civilian setup right now. Let's not talk about the government or the different interests over there. Let's talk purely about the Navy, the naval leadership over the years. Do you think there's also a clash of competing interest within the Navy? Because the way I see it, I would imagine it would be the Navy's responsibility to figure out a doctrine and give it to the government कि भाई this is what we want, this is the money you can give us, okay, इस इतने पैसे में हम फिर ये figure out करते हैं. Because to me right now it sounds like still no one has an idea of what do you want to prioritize. Do you want one more aircraft carrier, or do you want to convert Andaman and Nicobar command into sort of a pseudo aircraft carrier, or do you want more nuclear powered attack submarines? So is it possible that within the Navy there's confusion about which way to go, because of which they are not able to give that one clear picture to the government, which then leads to more confusion?
See, it's natural for, there to be interest groups within any military service. That's natural because, in any military, there will be voices that will advocate, aircraft carriers are the way to go. And some will say, no, it has to be submarines because submarines are the instruments of the future in terms of sea denial. The Indian Navy, the Indian government definitely got caught up in a kind of whirlpool of suggestions from all sides, not just internally but also externally. The US was also publishing these studies about China's maritime power. Oh, now they have aircraft carriers, but they'll soon have this capability as well. Oh, now they've unveiled a carrier killer missile, which basically kind of offsets the power projection of an aircraft carrier group. So all of these things were kind of whirling around in naval headquarters and the Ministry of Defense. Manohar Parrikar was the defense minister at that time. I remember when this whole issue was at its peak, when it became a situation of whether it should be either or. Do we have the luxury of having another aircraft carrier and also investing in submarines? You don't, because like you said, these are insanely prohibitively expensive pieces of equipment. So even doctrinally, it doesn't make sense to go in for everything. How thinly are you going to stretch your resources in terms of maintaining such disparate, offensive assets? The fact is, India also looks at the United States and says, here you've got an example of a country that has a large submarine force, but also has a huge carrier force. They've proven that the success of a blue water navy means having a mix of both. But are you a country that has the same kinds of resources or responsibilities or intentions as the United States? No, you don't. You really don't. You're not a country that intends to project power in the same way that the United States does. So taking that is a bad example. But having said that, when General Bipin Rawat was the Chief of Defence Staff, things came even more to a head where he kind of very dismissively said, aircraft carrier, a third aircraft carrier to nahi hoga. He was very muffat in that way, saying, sort of treating these sensitive issues of, what the forces need, like a drawing room conversation, which was not a bad thing. That was his style. But it ended up ruffling a lot of feathers, saying, "Arey, CDS ne bol diya ki aircraft carrier nahi lenge, submarine nahi lena hai." So that caused also quite a bit of turbulence within the system. Even now, like you said, now it's been decided we'll get another aircraft carrier, which leads to the question about, then what happens to our submarine arm? Does that mean that the submarine arm is high and dry? What happens to the SSN, program? Because the SSN program, and I repeat this again, it's nuclear powered, but it's not a deterrent force. It's not. These are submarines for your use right now. These are not ballistic missile submarines to be used in case of a nuclear provocation. These are submarines that you're going to use every day, where you're going to use that endurance in order to keep them at sea practically indefinitely. So that's where that question comes. So the short answer to your question is absolutely. There has been a lack of clarity. And I wouldn't blame the Navy entirely for this, because see, ultimately the forces don't take those level decisions are not taken by the Navy. They're taken by the political leadership. And I would say that there has been confusion over the last couple of decades over doctrinally which way to go. It's not like I say today that aircraft carrier, we'll choose aircraft carriers, and then tomorrow it's executed. These decisions have to be taken 15 years in advance, because you have to design the damn thing, then you've got to build it, then you've got to execute it, then you've got to assimilate it, then you've got to, and remember, these are not pistols. Where you buy a pistol, you shoot it at a range for a couple of days and you're done. An aircraft carrier, or a submarine, once it's inducted, especially a new asset, it takes months/years to make it operational and completely battle ready to do all its missions. It takes a long time. These are insanely, unimaginably complicated pieces of equipment. So it's not like you got it, chalo, manual pada, It's ready. Let's take it out and do what it takes. No, doesn't work like that. It takes a long time. So the Navy not only doesn't have the luxury of budget and cost, which you're right about, also doesn't have the luxury of time, which is also the reason why the Navy insists on Made in India, insists on Atmanirbhar Bharat. It's not out of the goodness of its heart. It's because yaar majburi hai. I would rather have my problems here in India than face them abroad. So there have been issues. Hopefully there will be clarity soon.
Yeah, hopefully. I think that's a good point on which to end this episode. And it's a good point also about these pieces of equipment take a long time. And, I think a point that illustrates that is by the time India will get around to having like a true blue sort of a ballistic, nuclear powered ballistic missile submarine, countries like the US and UK will already have retired their first generation variants and come up with the new classes. Both of the countries are currently on the fag end of developing a fresh class of
first generation
ballistic submarines. So that's that. So let's see where the SSN program goes, and let's hope to see a good photo of a SSN, Indian-made SSN submarine sometime in the near future. Thanks, Shiv, once again. Great chat, fun chat, and. To our listeners and viewers, this idea actually was pitched by a viewer to us on one of our previous episodes, the last one if I'm not wrong. So if you also have any ideas, if you have any questions that you want us answers to, if you have any topic that you think we should discuss, do let us know in the comments on YouTube, or you can also WhatsApp us. Our WhatsApp number is 8588 966 996. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries with your passport. Bye-bye.